Thank you. Can everybody hear me in the back if I talk this loud? Great. Okay. Thank you so much, both of you. And I'm just going to pick up exactly on the point that you left us with, Adam, about the importance right now, as we're seeing this sort of renewal of the spirit of the uprisings of 2011 around then, and also some of the gravest moments facing people across the Middle East, the Arab world, and some extremely challenging moments ahead. There's such an imperative on all of us to act, and luckily there's an amazing legacy of incredible solidarity work around the world, and including in this country. So as much as there's this long legacy and current moments of UK imperialism, there's also a parallel in every way of social movements, of progressive movements in this country saying we reject the idea that war is over there and we're over here, but actually our solidarity is going to make a major intervention in the business of, as usual, of the war economy. So I'm going to just give two examples of recent and actually ongoing campaigns that are solidarity campaigns that directly sort of speak to and intervene in that war economy, in the imperialism. And then I'm just going to draw a few lessons from the organizing of those things for us to keep in mind as we're thinking about what are the solidarity moments or movements that we can be organizing around today. So that'll, I think, hopefully lead into the small group discussions that we'll have after the panel. So the two examples that I'm going to talk about, one of them is, and actually probably a lot of the people in this room, or some of the people in this room, have been involved in some of these campaigns, so that's even more exciting. I want to start with talking about a campaign that we called the Stop G4S campaign. Some of you have probably heard of the company G4S. It's a British company. It's the world's largest private security company. And it's involved in all sorts of evil things around the world, including here in the UK. So G4S became known for being the private contractor that took people to deportation flights from the UK, people that were held in arbitrary detention here. And there was a famous case of someone, Jimmy Mbenga, who was killed by G4S security guards while he was being taken to a deportation flight. G4S at the same time was picking up contracts, security contracts all around the world, and especially in Egypt, Libya, Kenya also, actually all over the world, in refugee camps in Jordan. G4S was a massively growing company at that time. And one of the things that Waralmont, the organization I work for, it came on our radar. First, because it was this is an issue that was being brought up by different social movements here, by people that were involved in agitating for justice in migrant housing and all of these things. But there was also something that was brought up to us by movements that work with Palestinian political prisoners, who have an amazing example of self-organization amongst the political prisoners. They mentioned that they were seeing the G4S logo in the Israeli prisons that were holding Palestinian political prisoners. So a campaign, a global campaign around and against G4S, which was already starting, was really like taken to a new level. And the amazing thing about that campaign is that connection, that it was actually people in different places identified that British company that was operating in all of these different places and said, look, a good solidarity movement would be able to target that company that's based in your cities and that's also doing harm in your communities. So the Stop G4S campaign was really amazing. It was operating on universities, university students and faculty getting together to get G4S off their campuses, people agitating against philanthropic institutions that had shareholdings in G4S to get them to drop their holdings in G4S. And of course, agitating around the issue of the UK government continuing to award contracts to G4S to take care of things like rape crisis hotlines and the ambulances that take people to the hospital. So the issue of privatization in this country, of arbitrary detention in this country, was also linked to this kind of UK war economy, the G4S contracts that were being picked up, especially around the Middle East. So that was a really incredible campaign of people getting together, working across movements here, realizing that actually we're all working from the same values, and this British company is a sort of linchpin of all of the different elements of UK imperialism, whether it's militarism, privatization, neoliberalism, etc. So that's one example of a campaign, and again, we can talk more about it in the discussion. And another one, which is a bit more recent maybe, though actually has roots from a long time ago, is the Stop Arming Saudi campaign, which especially Campaign Against Arms Trade has been sort of holding for a really long time. So Kat has been doing research on the UK-Saudi arms trade for God knows how long, probably decades. And was quietly doing that research, really trying to push it forward, talking to MPs, talking to community groups, but that research and all of that hard work really came to fruition, especially in the past few years, when it became all the more clear that the Saudi-led war in Yemen is actually a British war also. It's an American and British war. When you're talking about that, the arming of the Saudi regime, the training of the pilots at the level that British and American support is going, it's no longer just somebody else's war, it's also a British war. And the work around the Stop Arming Saudi campaign has been really incredible because it's brought all of these different elements together. So there's the lobbying of MPs and Campaign Against Arms Trade, and other groups were able to get through kind of long, hard talks with MPs to get MPs on side on this issue and to start bringing the issue up in Parliament. It had a legal dimension, so Campaign Against Arms Trade and others brought a legal case against the UK government, saying the UK government's arms sales to the Saudi regime actually violate the UK's own policies. Not only does it violate all of our kind of sense of ethics, it violates the policies that the UK already has. But of course, Kat and others know that just a legal challenge is never enough, because it has to also be echoed by action in the streets. And that's one of the things that's been amazing too, is people taking direct action in outside arms companies, at the world's largest arms fair that takes place in London every 2 years. So the amazing model about that campaign is that it's happened in parliamentary advocacy, in legal ways, and also on the streets. And it's actually that combination that makes a very successful solidarity campaign. So those are two very concrete examples, and they're ongoing also, that can just give us a little bit of inspiration on how to think about intervening in this system. And of course, there's a lot more legacies to draw on that weren't specific to the Middle East. So if we think about the Anti-Apartheid Movement in this country, an amazing solidarity movement which was so creative, and really it's about bringing the issues to the fore. So it's tangible solidarity, tangible actions, but also they're really about bringing the story of imperialism back to the conversation here. And also, some of you may have seen the film that was made about the amazing trade union solidarity that was done with the people of Chile who were struggling against the regime of Pinochet. It was an amazing act of solidarity that was undertaken by workers who were working in an arms factory, and said, we're not going to keep making the motors for these Rolls-Royce, I don't remember what they were, airplanes, because we know where they're going, we know where they're being shipped. Incredible legacies of solidarity. And one of the things that's really important about those two cases also is that they were always involved in, or in many cases led by, diaspora communities or communities of people in exile that were coming from those places. So many of the people in this country on the left have been really energized by the folks that came from South Africa during apartheid, who were escaping, who were in exile, but really gave new energy to the left here and brought lessons from there. And same with the Chilean comrades too. And we're lucky to have the Arab Labor Group who can really be a part of those conversations when we're talking about solidarity with people in the Middle East. Groups of Arab people and other people from the Middle East have to be a part of that conversation, and actually are very often connected to progressive movements all around the world. And it's not just an addition, it's not just a useful thing to solidarity here, it's what's really going to drive successful solidarity campaigns. So just a few more key lessons or things for us to consider as we're thinking about what makes a successful campaign. One thing, and I'm really glad to hear that this has been brought up in a lot of the other sessions today, is that we have to reject this false division between national or domestic issues and international issues. And I think when we think about it from an economic standpoint and a social standpoint and every standpoint, we're trained to think that things that are international are things that happen over there, and we need to get our domestic house in order before we can think about international issues. That logic is completely false, and it's completely damaging. And one of the key ways that we hear it, actually, in relation to these issues is from the government and from the arms companies that say, well, you can choose. Either we have jobs in arms companies, in arms factories here, or you can have an end to war. So you have to choose between good jobs or justice, right? But that zero-sum game is a complete falsehood. There's no reason why we should accept that premise and be responding on that level. Of course, it takes a commitment from government and from industry to say, actually, we don't have to accept the logic of wars or justice. We should be thinking of the entire economy, not from a national perspective and then think of international at the kind of as the second thought, but our economy is already international, so we need to start the conversation by thinking about it globally. The second thing that I want to say, and this relates a little bit to what I was saying about the Stop Arming Saudi campaign, is that it's really important for us to think about policy recommendations and suggestions, and especially if we're thinking about sort of progressive MPs or progressive forces that may come into government. We need to be thinking in policy terms, but we should never let that limit the conversation or let our imagination end in a policy realm, because that will guarantee that the creativity and the transformation that's needed will never get there. Policy is already a limited scope, so we need all of those different pieces of the movement to keep the conversation energized and to keep it relevant and dynamic. The third thing I want to say, and this will inform our small group discussions, is that sector-based solidarity is really, really powerful. It doesn't have to be that way, but it's not the only kind of solidarity. But some of the most exciting examples are the National Union of Journalists, for example, who make connection with journalists in other countries, or teachers' unions that connect with teachers' unions in other places. It's a really strong way to have solidarity, students also, or faculty. So you can make sort of pointed interventions there, but it also breaks down that barrier of thinking that, like, people in other places are just an undifferentiated mass, and we have all of these differences here. So when you have sector to sector solidarity, it brings that sort of mutuality that's really important into it. And that leads into the final point that I make, which is that there's dignity in solidarity. So we're not talking about charity here, and we can't approach the issue of solidarity or the ideas of building campaigns as we're the nice philanthropic people here, and those poor people over there need our saving. No way, that's not the way that conversation can happen. And solidarity is a really different framing, and there's a dignity and a beauty in it. And I like something that I heard from Feroz this morning. I think you were quoting somebody else when you said it, but he said solidarity is what love looks like in the streets. And I thought that was a really powerful way to think about what our movements should be, and what we can be doing to build successful, effective, dynamic, and also loving and satisfying campaigns for justice.